Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. My name is Andrei Shevkun, and I would love to welcome you to my IB personal project, where I'm going to be recording videos such as these for my YouTube channel in order to help you improve at chess. I, myself, have been playing chess since I was around 7 years old. However, I've never really taken it seriously as it wasn't something I really enjoyed. But once I genuinely began to dig into the game, I understood how much I adored it. And honestly, now my evening consists of at least half an hour of chess. I play constantly online, but I never really found a time to play IRL, as I don't have many people that would play chess that I know of. Uh, I have a game coming up soon with my teacher, so wish me luck. But the point of this YouTube channel is to guide complete beginners to how to play the game of chess. As right now, you might have seen maybe like a Hikaru Nakamura stream, one of the greatest players in the world. But I wouldn't be surprised if you were extremely confused about what was happening in that video, or in that stream, or in that game that you were watching, that brought you to the game of chess. Maybe you watched The Queen's Gambit. That was single-handedly one of the best things to happen to chess, as it brought so much attention and media attention, and the chessboard sales exploded in price. And sales as well, as people wanted to play the game so badly. Well, online, where you don't really need to pay anything, on the site called chess.com, which is where I play and many others play, the game of chess is just wonderful. So, I would love to teach you how to play the game of chess. This video is intended for complete beginners. I'm talking people who have never touched a piece in their entire life. The people who don't know what a pawn is. The people who don't know how a bishop moves. If you're not one of those people, I wouldn't be surprised if you clicked off this video. However, if you're a beginner who has played a little bit of chess, I would still advise you to stick around, as there's some features that you probably don't know or never heard of. For example, the en passant. Have you heard of the en passant? Most people have, but you might have not. So, let me show you the game of chess. So, today I want to discuss like the very basics of chess. The pieces, such as the pawn, the knight, the bishop, the rook, the queen, and the king. First, let's start with the actual board. The board consists of 8 by 8 squares, so 64 square board. The number seems quite large, and in certain situations, the board feels massive, and in others, it feels tiny. For example, if you have a closed position, which means that there's still a lot of pieces on the board, or all of them, as none have been taken yet, it feels very tight, and you have barely any breathing room. However, in a more open position, or in an endgame situation, which I'll talk about in a different video, there's so much space that you don't even know what to do with. You don't know. It just feels like you're not gonna make it to places in time. But let's begin. So, in the game of chess, you have two teams. Well, the white team and the black team. What is the difference between the two? The white team always gets the first move. So they always make the first move, and black has to respond to that. This usually makes a white the more attacking side, and black the more defensive side. However, this really depends on the opening, and certain openings can make black very aggressive. So, I'll talk about openings in a different video. This video is just for the pieces. The first piece I would like to talk about is the pawn. These are the pawns. There's 16 pawns on the board, 8 on each side. How does the pawn move? First of all, the first move that any pawn makes can be either 1 or 2 squares. So usually when you're starting a game, you would want to go 2 squares to occupy as much space as possible. Or you could also go 1. What does the pawn do after its first move? Well, it can only move 1 square, which seems a little bit underwhelming. However, the potential of the pawn just makes it so much better. How does a pawn take? A pawn takes to its left and right diagonal. So so if I were to push this pawn, my pawn would be able to take that pawn. Do you understand what I mean? Same if the pawn were here. Let's go back. What else? What is the point of a pawn? The pawn has mostly 2 purposes. The first is structure. Every chess position and every chess opening usually makes a structure. And the weaker your structure, the easier you are to be attacked. The easier it is to attack you. And the stronger your structure, the more compact your position usually is. You don't have as much breathing room. However, it's extremely difficult to attack you. This is usually created by pawn chains, as pawns support each other. So, in this situation, you're not able to take this pawn, as it's defended by this pawn. You're not able to take this pawn, as it's defended by this pawn. And you're not able to take this pawn, as it's defended by the bishop. However, they have very limited squares from which this pawn is able to be taken. It's quite vulnerable and can kill your position if you were to move your bishop, but not in this situation. Only in a situation, for example, where the opposition's team is here, and it would be able to bulldoze down here. But I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about the queen later and stuff like that. Well, one thing I forgot to mention is how pieces are valued. Every piece is valued with material points. So a pawn has 1 point, is valued at 1 material point. A knight and a bishop, both of them, are valued at 3 points each. A rook is valued at 5 pieces. A queen is valued at 9 pieces. And the king doesn't have a value, as if you lose him, you lose the game. So, after that being said, this is why a pawn structure is very important. As you're not usually you wouldn't be able to take this pawn with a knight and just lose material. You're going to be trading a 1 material point, a 1 material piece for a 3 material piece, which is not ideal. Let me tell you about the second purpose of the pawn. The second purpose of the pawn is that it stores a lot of potential. So if a pawn were to make it to the end of the board, it is able to become any piece it wants to. The chess.com gives you 4 choices: a bishop, a rook, a knight, and a queen. Most of the time you're going to be choosing a queen, as it's the most valued piece. And later on in any game, usually this brings a massive advantage. And you're either able to trade this queen for material, as you still, this queen would be valued at 1 material point. Because for you it would be valued at the 1 material point, as you just promoted a pawn to that. So in an end game, when your opponent only has 1 rook, it would make sense to trade this queen off if you have another piece that is able to checkmate. We'll get into that later. But that's why pawns are very important in any chess game. Then, what other pieces do we have? The next piece I would like to mention is the bishop. The bishop is quite a basic piece. It functions just on the diagonals. It can go any distance on the diagonals. So it can go like this. It can go back. It can go forward and back. The pawn is the only piece that is not able to go back. So the bishop isn't as valuable as the rook, as it cannot checkmate a king on its own. Like, you cannot checkmate a king with a bishop and a knight and a king. Professionals found a way to checkmate with a bishop and a knight, but it's still, I'm pretty sure it requires an error by the opponent, so I don't think it still counts. So this is why it's valued a lot less than the rook. And it is way harder to make forceful moves with a bishop, but a bishop can do a thing which is called a pin. A pin is something I'll talk about in a later video, but briefly, it's when you force a piece, it's when you connect a piece to another piece, pretty much. If this knight is connected to this king, so if this knight were to move, I would take the king. So this knight is unable to move. Look, if I try to drag and drop it somewhere, it just won't move. Well, if I try to drag and drop it somewhere, it just won't move. The next piece I would like to talk about is the knight. What is the knight? The knight is this horse. I don't know why it's not called a horse. It was a horse for decades, so I don't understand why it's called a knight. But a knight moves in an L shape. It goes one step forward, 2 steps forward, and 1 to the left or right. It can do this in any direction, forward or back. It doesn't matter. You have 2 of these on the board, and there's often a debate on which is better, the bishop or the knight. And professionals say, grandmasters, the best players of the game usually consider the bishop the better piece. However, it's not. However, on a level like ours, where we don't completely understand the game, we wouldn't be able to. We're not as good as them. It's usually the knight is the better piece, as it can make very unexpected moves and surprise your opponent. Another thing the knight can do is to fork 2 pieces, but I'm gonna talk about that in a different video. Okay, let's talk about the next piece, the rook. The rook is quite a simple piece to understand, and what the rook does is that it can go any direction, left, forward, down, or right, and it can move in a straight line for as many squares as it wants to. It can move around how it wants to, free on the line, and this piece is valued at 5 material points because this is the because you're able to checkmate a king systematically with only a rook and a king. That's all you need to checkmate someone. So you're also able to checkmate with a queen, but I'll talk about how to do that in a different video. Okay, so the rook also is involved in castling, which I will mention later. So now the last piece, the queen. The queen is definitely the best piece in chess. What does the queen do? It can move in straight lines and diagonals how it wants to any distance. That's why it's valued at 9 material points. And is just incredibly powerful. It's usually used as a defensive piece. However, once you have an attack going, a queen is very good at supporting that or even finishing it off, as the king is very vulnerable to the queen, as in many situations, a checkmate is delivered by a queen, usually. Okay, so what is the last piece? The last piece is the king. The ultimate piece. The most important piece of the board. So, how does it move? It moves one square. The best piece in the game, the most important piece in the game, moves one square. It can go one square left in any direction. However, it's still one square. I know that's quite underwhelming. However, you still need to keep him safe, as if he's in danger, he's gonna be... you're gonna lose the game. Usually, you can threaten the king with for example, let's say a bishop, a queen in this situation. This is called the check. When there's an attack on the king, which is able to be prevented and stopped, that's called a check. In this situation, the only I can move my pawn. I can move my pawn in front of this queen, or I can move the king. Those moving the king would block out my bishop and kind of my queen. So that's and it will also prevent me from castling, which I will mention later. But the moving the pawn is just gonna threaten the queen. It's gonna make the queen move, and it's a forcing move. So the queen is gonna move, and there's no longer a threat. It's not as good for your structure, as now there's so much space here. I won't really suggest castling this side, but I'll talk about that later. Then the final part is, what is a checkmate? A checkmate is when the king is threatened and no longer able to be, this threat isn't able to be stopped. So this is a checkmate. Why is it a checkmate? Because the queen is covering all the squares that the king has available. These are the three squares that the king can move to. And why can't the king take the queen? Because it's defended by the bishop. So it's already a checkmate, because even if the king were to attempt to take, then the bishop would take back. So you would win the game. This is what you need to prevent. This is the entire game of chess. You need to get the other opponent's king without him getting yours. The last thing I want to mention is, what is castling? Castling is a positional thing. It's something that stabilizes your position, and it's when you're moving defensives to one side of the board. That's when you move your defense to one of the sides on the board. So here, I can shift my defenses. I can shift my king over to the right side, as the king and the rook haven't moved. Either of them haven't moved, and there's space between them. There's free space between them, and nothing is threatening that space. So if I were to have a bishop staring down this, you wouldn't be able to castle. But since there isn't anything, you're able to castle. There's also a second variation of the castle, and that is the long castle. To long castle, you just do the same thing, but on the other side. Let's look at this look at the black side. On the side, there's 3 spaces. whereas there were two when we did this castle. So this would be the long castle, as the queen was here. So it's a longer castle. So we do the same process. It's the same process, and you. So what are the benefits of this? The benefits of the long castle is that the rook is in a more active file. It's fighting more for the center, as here you would usually either keep the rook protecting this pawn, or you would move it more to the center to keep it on an open file or defending something else. For example, the center. Here, the rook is already in the center. However, there's also a downside to this, as this pawn is unprotected by your king. In this situation, you would usually have a pawn here, and the king protects all three of the pawns. She can't just grab it and run away. Whereas on this side, if a bishop were to, for example, be here and take it, nothing would be able to take it back. The king would be able to take it back. In this situation, the knight is the only defender of this pawn. But if, for example, we were to trade a bishop for this knight, this pawn is unprotected. These are the very, 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 very basics of chess. I know I'm not the greatest of explainers, but if you understand this, you're gonna be able to understand the next video I make. It's gonna use the same concepts and explain further concepts. So, thank you for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. And I hope you have a great, great day, night, weekend, birthday, I don't know. Goodbye.